connected with Eureka? Are we connected with Caltrans?
Yes. Are they on?
Okay. Okay, great. All right, so at 1:31, we'll call this meeting to order, the Mendocino Council of Governments. First thing on our agenda is roll call.
Director Jim Brown. Alternate Director Greta Connie.
Here.
Director Richie Wasserman. Director Tess Alvin Smith. Director John Haschak.
Here.
Director Rex Jackman on the phone.
Here.
Vice Chair Michael Carter.
Here.
And Chair Dan Jurdy.
Here. Okay, now we're going to convene as the Regional Transportation Agency and immediately recess and reconvene as the Policy Advisory Committee. The first thing on our agenda is public expression. Public expression is welcome on subjects that are not on the agenda, and then as we get to those agenda items, you're also, of course, welcome to speak on the agenda items. Do we have any public comments on non-agenda items? Okay. Next on our agenda is regular calendar. We have report and discussion on the Fire Vulnerability Assessment and Emergency Evacuation Preparedness Plan.
All right. So the Fire Vulnerability Assessment and Emergency Evacuation Preparedness Plan is a grant project. We received an adaptation planning grant from Caltrans and just recently have gotten Category 5 consultants on board to conduct that. So the project includes a vulnerability assessment and then evacuation planning, sort of two separate parts. And we've got Bob Newman here from Category 5 to give a summary of the project and progress to date. And this will be an opportunity. It's just an informational item today, but it's an opportunity for board members to ask questions.
Good afternoon, Board. As mentioned, my name is Bob Newman. I'm one of the principals with Category 5, and we're happy to be here in the county. It's quite a challenging event that we have, or process that we have ahead of us. You know, there's an old fire service axiom, if you will, that when it comes to evacuations, there are the 3 Ps. The first one is have a plan, the second one is practice the plan, and the third one is preach the plan. Well, you currently don't have a plan, and we're here to resolve that. As we resolve that, we're going to hopefully force you into practicing the plan. And then the third component of this whole process, if you will, is a public outreach component. So once we get the plan put together, we want to take the plan out to the public for both input and for education. So we have not yet scheduled, but we will be doing 4 community outreach meetings throughout the county once the whole product comes together. We've already been hard at work. We've been in the county. This is our second trip. We're from San Luis Obispo, essentially. And so this is our second trip up, and we've been able to accomplish quite a bit so far. We've been able to get together with the sheriff OES folks and the fire chiefs. We met all the fire chiefs at their monthly meeting in November, and we've come to a couple of conclusions. The first thing is that the plan that we're going to put together will follow what we call NWCG, National Wildfire Coordinating Group, so that we're all working, all the fire agencies and the law enforcement folks are all working on the same format, if you will. And that's important because as you reach out for mutual aid to surrounding counties, you want those folks also, and that's what we all traditionally do. So the other thing that we've come to concurrence on is that we need, based on a variety of issues, to break the county into 4 planning areas, if you will. And these planning areas are based on your current mutual aid zones. Those mutual aid zones come together in coordination with CAL FIRE and the battalion chiefs' actual response areas. And they take into account the weather, the various weather aspects, the topography, transportation corridors, all those different sorts of things. They're predetermined. The fire folks know them. The medical folks know them. So we've come to the conclusion that that's it. As we break those planning areas down, we will put them into what we call planning zones, if you will. And then even further down into that, we'll call them area-specific planning areas, and then actual evacuation zones. For example, this morning on the coastal zone, on the north coastal zone, we met with the Fort Bragg fire chief and came to the conclusion that we'll do about 7 different evacuation zones there that surround the urban interface, if you will, of Fort Bragg. A couple of things I did want to point out to you. One is that while the plan is basically driven and is quite a bit specific to wildland fire, it is what we call a multi-hazard plan. So it will be good for flood, it will be good for hazmat spills, also will be good for if you should have some sort of a public health emergency. So that's how it all unfolds as a multi-hazard, not multi-hazard, but a multi-use evacuation plan. In getting it out to the public, we're using a survey to try and figure out where the public is actually at. And so we've been online now about 3 days with a product called SurveyMonkey, and I think you saw the survey. We've even adjusted it a little bit since that original one went out, because we found that people were more interested in some things that we missed, like cell phone coverage. So we're kind of gathering more information there. It's about to go on Mendo Voice, and as of this morning, not even being on Mendo Voice, we'd already had about 70 hits, and those are coming in cooperation through the school district, or the Office of Education. So that's about it. We're excited to be here and working with your law enforcement folks and your fire folks. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I'll just start off. I appreciate the fact that you've expanded the scope. I didn't know we were able to expand the scope to include the survey on cell phone coverage, but there are so many areas in Mendocino County where there is inadequate cell phone coverage, and just in the very northernmost part of the county, for example, Leggett, Piercy, there's very limited cell phone coverage and very limited internet service, and so people are that much more dependent on the limited cell phone coverage they have, and I've just heard repeated frustrations expressed by people up there about their internet service.
I met with Chief Maxey on Friday from the Westport Fire Department, and that was one of his concerns also, is, how are we going to deal with this issue? It is a big rural county.
And as you probably have heard, is that in the last power shutdown, when there's some things that are being worked out in the county's communication system, in that there were people who were given text messages because they had signed up for alerts, but they oftentimes were, at least initially, receiving alerts to direct them on their phone to go to a website for further information. So the county's working on that, so hopefully the next time it will just give them the essential information in the text message itself. Because again, in the power shutdown, much of the internet system that's in place was already compromised. So for example, Comcast, and I haven't heard really a great reason for this, it just went down countywide very shortly after the power shutdown, and so people who had Comcast had no internet service. I was talking to one person who was watching the World Series on their television because they had Dish TV and they had a power generator, but they couldn't communicate on what they thought was a premium internet service from Comcast. So they were pretty frustrated about that.
Yeah, this whole public safety power shutdown is new to all of us in the emergency response world, the disaster preparedness world. We've never faced anything like this before, so it's interesting.
Thank you. Hi. I represent the north part of this county, Willits, Laytonville, Covelo area, and I thought that part of the scope of this vulnerability study would be looking at road issues, one way in, one way out, and all of those kind of features that we have in abundance in this county. So is that part of the scope of your study?
It definitely is. We've already met with the, I'm not exactly sure of his title, but I think it's your county engineer, and he's shared with us all the plans that he has in place and all the difficulties that he's been having. So we're most definitely going to look at all those things. That was one of the issues this morning that we discussed with the Fort Bragg fire chief. He's got a large subdivision over there that we're looking at, approaches to get, another way out. So that's definitely a key component, transportation.
Great. So part of your work will be coming up with recommendations about what you think would be highest priority, or some of those
Correct.
access
Right.
issues.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of a time frame are we looking at, say, before we get some kind of at least a draft that's going to be open for public input?
I'm an ex-fire chief. I can't imagine that you don't have an evacuation plan. The project is designed to be a 2-year project, as I understand. That's our commitment is to have it done in 2 years. I cannot let these fire chiefs go another fire season. So my goal is to have the evacuation plan done by the next fire season. The vulnerability, the fire vulnerability study, I mean, if you talk to the fire chiefs, they go, we have a fire problem. We all know we have a fire problem. The fire vulnerability study will bring a little bit of science to that and tell us where it really is. But the reality is that we can do those two things at once. And so I'm committed to get that evacuation plan to the fire chiefs before fire season hits hard.
Thanks. I think that one of the things I've found is that there's a lack of communication between a lot of the agencies dealing with fire prep, evacuation plans and all those kind of issues. And so do you have a plan to bring all, we have many different organizations working on evacuation plans and all within kind of silos. And so is there a plan to bring those together?
Correct. Well, the way this project is laid out by your staff is that they put together what they call a technical advisory group. And that group comes together and reviews all the work that we do. So that's how we will engage all the various stakeholders and partners, is through that process. Red Cross for shelter welfare, on and on and on, all those sorts of things. So all that group is in formation. We've held one kickoff meeting, and we will continue to carry that through the planning project. The core group now that was really important for me to get going was the sheriff and the fire folks. And then now that we've come on agreement as to what the framework is going to look like, we'll start sharing that and looking for input from all those other advisory bodies.
Okay, thank you.
That's how we are approaching it. Well, we're currently working over on the coast, so I'll get back over there before it starts to rain.
So the survey, we will be providing a link to the survey on the MCOG website, and then we can share that with all of you. So if you know of people that would be interested, you can send the link out. And if anyone has other suggestions about or ideas on how to share that survey with the public, we're interested in those suggestions as well.
I'm sure the Supervisor Hashak and I would both be happy to forward it to some of the fire safe councils in our districts.
Yes, and
That's another group that we're meeting with, engaged.
Yes.
In fact, the fire safe council is on our TAG group.
So are you talking about the countywide? Because there's the countywide
The county, and then there's all
Countywide.
the various
Yeah.
neighborhood focus groups.
Quite a few.
There's about 12 of them. I haven't got through them all yet, but
I think there's more than 12.
are there? Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot. Okay, that's a good idea. Okay, thank you very much. Now we're on to the Technical Advisory Committee recommendations of November 20th, 2019 for public hearing.
So this
See, we have
is,
proper notice here.
yes, you've got the proof of publication there. So the draft was on the agenda in November, and there was concurrence at that time on the Technical Advisory Committee's initial recommendation. Since then, it's been back to the Technical Advisory Committee, the full document. And James is here to go through the document and the recommendation.
Good afternoon. So, as the chair can see, notice for this meeting was published on November 21st in the Ukiah Daily Journal. And this document is pretty much the same as what we saw before in November. Let's see. So, section, I can go through it section by section if you'd like. Section 1 is the executive summary, 2 is just general information. contact information for the COG and who put this thing together. 3 breaks down what an RTIP actually is. It is just essentially the programming document for transportation projects in the county. Let's see, 5 is, let's see, that's the 4. 4 goes over some prior RTIP projects that have been completed that are no longer in here. 5 is the schedule for the actual RTIP development, and we are on time to get it to Caltrans. And then we get to section 6, which lays out what the summary of the request programming is. And we went over that before. There was some questions about timing. You know, how long an agency has before they have to say yes or no to a project. And I believe that's, for the most part, it's been resolved for now. Let's see. The next fun part is, I guess, section 10, which just shows how these projects concur with the RTP, the Regional Transportation Plan. And then 11 summarizes the benefits to the region and state of the RTIP. And then 14 is probably what you guys would care about the most, which is the schedule of the projects. There was a little bit of change specifically to the roundabout at Low Gap and North Bush. Those components got pushed out a little bit to give the city some more time to really figure out what's going to happen at that intersection. There are some pretty maps in appendix, or section 20, just shows where they are. The only thing that is left to go into here is section 15, which are the programming requests. And I've got all of those but one signed off by the agency, so I'm just waiting for the city of Ukiah to get back to me, and that shouldn't be an issue. And then other than that, it's ready to send to Caltrans.
So those project programming request forms are forms for each individual project that lay out the same information that is provided in section 14, the funding for each component and the schedule for each project. Those are just a required form that we have to submit along with this document to Caltrans.
Are there any questions?
Yeah, maybe if I could ask one question.
Yep.
At one of our recent Board of Supervisors meetings, Supervisor Williams, who can't be here because of the Brown Act, did ask Supervisor Hashak and I to kind of have some sort of follow-up conversation with Caltrans and the market down there. I believe that everything was worked out, it's my understanding, that there will not be additional parking eliminated, but apparently Supervisor Williams is hearing from the market owner that they're still concerned that even though the plan itself isn't eliminating parking, that he's concerned about that at some future point, a neighboring merchant has the theoretical ability to go back to Caltrans and remove some on-street parking with some landscaping. My understanding was that that's pretty theoretical, that Caltrans is highly unlikely to put in this infrastructure and then just take it back out 5 years later.
Yes, and I spoke with Supervisor Williams also, and I have tried reaching out to the market owner who has that concern, but I agree, I think that was resolved at the last meeting and in conversations with Caltrans since then. This current plan, or this current project, that's not something that's on the table currently. The only parking that would be removed would be where at intersections where you have red immediately adjacent to the intersection for visibility. But there's nothing on the table currently that would allow property owners to opt out of parking. In my conversations with Caltrans, they said the only way that they would ever consider, a change to the parking in the future is if operational or safety requirements made it necessary, and then it would be a community effort. It wouldn't be one individual or any individual business owners or property owners saying that they wanted to eliminate parking in one particular spot. So it's not something that is currently being considered. The project manager discussed the option of including in the project report language to that effect, just to make it very clear. So that's something that could possibly be done, although he didn't see that it was really necessary because it's not part of the project currently. But I will continue to try to talk to the people that are involved, and I'll check back in with Supervisor Williams as well. But it's not part of the current project. And for the foreseeable future, isn't something that's going to be happening.
Okay, thanks. Have any questions or comments before we open up the public hearing?
Yeah, and before opening the public hearing, if you could just make the finding of proper notice.
Okay. So we do appear to have proper notice here for this public hearing. Does someone want to make a motion to establish that we had proper notice?
So moved.
Second.
Director Brown? Alternate Director Connie? Yes. Director Wasserman?
Yes.
Director Haschak?
Yes.
Director Jackman?
Yes.
Director Carter?
Yes.
And Chair Jurdy?
Yes.
I'd just like to make a suggestion. Perhaps James could review some of the acronyms not everyone is familiar with. They're listed in particularly the resolution on scheduled
So
projects.
I think the acronyms that you're
Right-of-way,
referring to are
construction,
for
DS&E,
the
that kind of
project components.
So in section 14, under the project schedule, there's a few different acronyms here. E&P,
Environmental permits.
environmental and permits, I just call it environmental. PS&E, plan specs and estimate. Right-of-way, ROW, right-of-way. You'll see, actually not in this, but in the staff report, on the back side, it says for Gualala, right-of-way support. So the right-of-way without the support is capital. Support costs are for the time it takes to actually do the work. And con is construction. So, did I miss any?
No, those are all the acronyms, but just to clarify, for state implemented projects, the both right-of-way and construction are separated into support costs, which is their staff time, and capital costs. For local projects, they're all lumped into one. So that's why you see the separation between support and capital on some projects and not others.
Would this be a good time to open up for public comment?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll open up the public hearing at 1:55. Do we have any members of the public who'd like to comment?
Hi, I'm Tom Murphy from the Walhalla Municipal Advisory Council. And thank you for taking up this project today. This is a project that the town of Walhalla is very, very interested in going forward on. We desperately need some improvements on that roadway, and this will bring needed sidewalks and bike paths to the area. I just wanted to add to what Nafili mentioned about the opt-out provision, which has become somewhat controversial, and I just want to refer back to a statement. Is Frank on the phone today, Nafili?
No.
Okay. That Frank Demling made at the last meeting when we discussed this. He said, as far as the parking opting out in the future, I think that's something an individual business owner should have the option for, but not at the expense of other businesses. I think that pertains to this situation. I think as we saw in this case, if there are individuals in the community opposed to that, it definitely come up, and there may be another change.org petition. We had a national petition drive involved in this debate. We don't want to get into another contentious debate, so I would hope any decision for the future businesses to opt out could be done in a collaborative effort, that it won't impact other businesses, but other businesses would have that option if there were adequate parking available, quote unquote. So, and after he said that, I said I stand by his statement, which I think is fair. So I don't think that's a concern at this time, that it would impact other businesses. And then the other thing I just want to mention in passing on this was that in approving this, the town came together in a large town hall meeting. There were a lot of people from outside the county there. The consensus of the meeting was based on the form of the road for 2 lanes of parking, 2 lanes of traffic, the option of having a turn lane sometime in the future if Caltrans deemed it necessary, and then the bike paths and the sidewalks. But one of the things that kind of got lost in the shuffle was greenery. This project, as I understand it, would take out just about all the landscaping in the area, and I just asked MCOG to keep an eye on that. It would extend beyond the current hedgerows that are along the sides of the streets in Wallala and create a 64-foot wide path of concrete and asphalt. That was the plan approved by the town hall, and GMAC endorsed that unanimously. I just want to mention that that's something that was one of the factors that I think was overlooked in the planning process. Thank you.
Do we have any other public comments for this public hearing? Okay, seeing none, I guess we'll close the public hearing at 1:58.
So I can, just to follow up on those comments, the landscaping, which had been considered for the Wallala project in some conceptual designs in earlier planning processes, ultimately, in order to allow room for all of the critical components of the project without a massive right-of-way. Unfortunately, the landscaping was something that had to be eliminated. It's also something that Caltrans has concerns about because of maintenance. Sometimes those things, I guess, are installed, but then without an agreement for maintenance, they become problematic. So it may be, maybe property owners can include landscaping on their property, but it's not part of the actual Caltrans streetscape project currently. So, so the RTIP document, once MCOG approves this, will go to Caltrans by the December 15th due date. The document and all of the projects will be reviewed by Caltrans and the California Transportation Commission. They will then release their recommendations, and ultimately it will be adopted as part of the State Transportation Improvement Program, which typically happens in April. Then the earliest programming in this document and in the State Transportation Improvement Program, or STIP, starts in the 2021 fiscal year, so that's when this would kick in, essentially, would be July of next year.
I'll make a motion that we adopt resolution 2019-10 adopting the 2020 regional transportation.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, roll call, I guess.
Director Brown?
Yes.
Alternate Director Connie?
Yes.
Director Wasserman?
Yes.
Director Albin Smith?
Yes.
Director Haschak?
Yes.
Director Jackman?
Yes.
Director Carter?
Yes.
And Chair Jurdy?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to thank the staff for all the work they did on this. I know there's a lot of moving pieces, but thanks for bringing it in a pretty understandable way.
You're welcome.
I would just like to second that. As a newbie here, I found this report to be very clear, and I'm excited about what's going forward for our county, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Of course, it's nice to see some money flowing back into MCOG. We've gone through a bit of a drought.
Yes, and hopefully this will be the start of the new normal we expect in 2 years. The next step will be even a little better than this as the revenues continue. There are certain revenue sources that are just now kicking in that were part of SB1. So we hope to see this trend continue. All right.
Okay, I think we're on to 2020 board calendar.
Yes. So Janet has put together the draft board calendar. Do you want to, we have a couple alternatives to talk about, but did you want to kind of review?
Sure, we'd like to bring this forward in December to give you a look ahead and then adopt it in February when we're sure who all the members will be on the board so they can have input. It doesn't seem like we have much turnover, if any, this year, but this is your preview. And we meet 9 or 10 times a year. There are several months during the year, January, July, September, that we do not meet, or holidays and things like that during those times. And the other thing to mention is that we've been having these mobile tours, these transportation tours around the county. So we've had that 1 or 2 times a year. We've got placeholders in the calendar for those in April and October, so we can discuss that today and see what might make sense. We don't necessarily have to commit to those yet. And the last thing to mention is that in August, we move from the first Monday of the month to the third Monday. It kind of bridges this long gap between the June and October meetings. I guess there's another thing I should say that came to my attention. At the bottom, you notice we have these related meetings of interest and educational options. And we like to attend the CALCOG annual forum. And this year, that falls in April and conflicts with our board meeting. So that's something to note. We might talk about options for that April meeting. April is a meeting that we've often canceled due to lack of business at that time of year. Typically, we're doing a lot of work in committees in the spring. But on the other hand, we might have a tour. And so anyway, these are some things we can talk about today.
Yeah, so one thing that I'd like to ask board members is if you still want to try to do 2 tours a year, or is it preferable to do 1? So for the last 3 years, we've done 1 tour per year. Earlier this year, we went to the South Coast. In 2018, we saw the Willits and Laytonville areas. In 2017, we went to Fort Bragg. In 2016, we did 2 tours. We went to Willits, and we did a tour of the Ukiah area in the spring. 2015, we just did 2015, 14, and 13, we did just 1 tour. So we did Hopland, Anderson Valley, and Covelo. So it's really kind of gone back and forth whether we do 1 or 2 tours per year. We thought that in 2020 it might be appropriate to do a tour of the Ukiah area. It'll have been 4 years since we've done a tour of the Ukiah area. We could do that in the spring, and there are really 2 options for that. We could do a tour in April and do just the tour. We could also, because we wouldn't have to allow travel time, we could do it in conjunction with the regular May meeting. That way, if there's not a need for an April meeting, we have an option to cancel that meeting. If we did it in conjunction with the May meeting, it would be a morning tour followed by our regular afternoon board meeting. We could also go to Covelo in the fall. The Covelo State Route 162 multi-use trail will hopefully start construction next year, so it might be better to do a Covelo tour either in the fall of next year or wait until the following year. We could do Ukiah in either the spring or fall. Of course, fall allows for one additional construction season, so there may be more completed projects or projects that are underway at that time.
It kind of depends a lot on what's ready to look at. Is there something to go see? You know, are there plans to talk about? Are there projects being done, or is the progress being made out there in any of the communities? That's what we're looking at.
So I've enjoyed it when we've had 2 tours in a year, but we did just go through a stretch here where there was very little, transportation dollars for
Right.
several years, and as most people know, it takes several years to plan projects and then to finally build them and have the ribbon cuttings and all that.
Yes.
So given that, I think maybe the best thing for this coming year would be if we had the tour scheduled for May, and as you said, here in the Ukiah, and then perhaps in 2021 look at having a spring and fall.
Mm-hmm. And we could tentatively schedule a fall tour if more construction happened this summer than we can see in one tour. We could tentatively schedule that fall tour as well, and then cancel if it seems unnecessary in the future. So we can do the draft or the final board calendar with a May tour and then tentative fall date.
That's just anybody else's feedback?
You know, I like having a schedule, but I know that schedules can be changed. This is a good working schedule to go off of. If things change, they change.
Yeah.
And if there's something happening that you want us to see, let's go take a look at it. Otherwise, and let's adopt this for now and see what pans out.
And it's not on for final action today, just direction, and then final action would be in February.
And of course, we can amend it during the year.
Yes.
Sure, that's a good plan.
Because I personally really did enjoy the tour. So I enjoyed the
Good.
Laytonville tour, and especially the Gualala tour. So if there's something to see, I'd like to go see it.
Yeah, and besides the board having an opportunity to go out and see areas of the community they might not have had the opportunity to see, it's an opportunity for the local people to come out and see what MCOG's doing. And we typically have our board meeting there on site at the location, and it lets people come who might not have traveled over to Ukiah in the middle of the day, for instance. So it kind of works in both directions.
Well, I mean, just looking at the projects that are underway, at least in the planning process, kind of even look at the emergency preparedness process that we've got undergoing, and that perhaps could even be an interesting meeting, but it's still probably a little early. It's probably more of a 2021 process, and it's countywide too. So what community do you go to?
Right, and that's part of the planning projects that we're doing often lend themselves to one of the board tours that we do. So if we're doing a community planning project, we want to go do a board tour of that location and allow for public input in that location. The big projects that we have right now are countywide projects, so a little trickier to work those into a tour. But perhaps later in the fire vulnerability study, there would be more opportunity when it comes to prioritizing improvements and needed improvements for evacuation routes. That would be something that would be a little more location specific. So that's something we can keep in mind.
Okay, do you feel
So
you have
shall,
enough feedback?
I think we do, yeah.
So when I bring this back, we'll tentatively schedule a tour for May rather than April, and tentatively have a October tour, possibly to Covelo if that's ready.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, now I believe we're on to the consent calendar, which includes the minutes of November 4th. and the staff report for the conflict of interest code. And we have the report, but if you want to go over any of this, feel free.
Move approval of the consent calendar.
Second.
Okay. Motion a second.
All right, Director Brown,
Yes.
Connie,
Yes.
Wasserman,
Yes.
Alvin Smith,
Yes.
Haschak,
Yes.
Jackman,
Yes.
Carter,
Yes.
and Jurdy.
Yes. Okay. Now we are going to recess as a policy advisory committee, reconvenes the transportation planning agency. Do we have a motion to ratify our actions as the policy advisory committee?
I will so move.
I'll second.
Director Brown,
Yes.
Director Connie,
Yes.
Director Wasserman,
Yes.
Director Alvin Smith,
Yes.
Director Haschak,
Yes.
Director Carter,
Yes.
and Chair Jurdy.
Yes. Okay, now we're on to reports, the informational items. Mendocino Transit Authority. We have Director Alvin Smith and myself are on the MTA board. I don't know if there's really anything to report at this time from MTA.
They didn't even have, they had a quickie meeting on a, we were there, just one issue on applying for a grant.
Yeah, so it's
And,
not terribly noteworthy.
yeah,
Okay.
Okay.
North Coast, I don't know if anyone here was North Coast North Coast Rail Authority.
Well, we didn't have a meeting in November, so nothing to report.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay, we have got the MCOG staff, administrative staff report. Do you want to go over any of this?
Just one item on that I will highlight was the, on November 14th, the Blosser Lane walking audit. We met with Caltrans and Willits community representatives. This Blosser Lane is a street in the Willits area that intersects with Highway 20. One of the last board tours that we did, some of you will recall, we stood at that intersection as the logging trucks were driving by very quickly, and so you got to experience the problems at that intersection. But Caltrans, on this walking audit, they laid out some cones so people could get an idea of a couple of different improvement options for the intersection, and the community liked the idea of what was called a protected intersection, which includes extended curbs to shorten crossing distance, high visibility crosswalks with beacons at the crosswalk location, like flashing beacons at the crosswalk location, as well as in advance for cars coming from either direction. So it's something that Caltrans believes they can provide some of those improvements in the short term as part of the as part of one of their safety projects, and then the more extensive parts of that project would come in the future, but still relatively soon. So that was a really productive meeting with a lot of good community input. So that's all I wanted to point out of interest on that report.
Thanks. Director Haschak?
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that Blosser Lane has the elementary school on it. And so it's kind of with Highway 20 there, it divides the elementary school from a lot of the community. And there are kids, right now the policy is the kids can't walk to school or bike to school because of that highway. But I'm sure lots of kids use that, do cross it on the weekends or when they want to come to the school to play or whatever. So it is, I'm glad that there's some movement on doing something to make it more crossable.
Yeah, it was a really productive meeting, and there is the elementary school, and as you mentioned, they have a policy that discourages walking. That was something that we discovered in our active transportation program non-infrastructure project, where we were working with the students and staff at schools to try to encourage active transportation. But of course, at that school, that wasn't something that fit in with their policies because of that intersection. In addition to the elementary school, there's also the middle school that's just a couple blocks on further in the same area. And then on the other side of the intersection is residential area. So there's a lot of, if that intersection were improved, there's a lot of opportunity for kids to walk or ride bikes to school if the intersection were safe enough for them to do so. So it's very promising.
One of the options that had been looked at for that intersection was a roundabout, and there had been discussion at that point that that would be a good location for kind of a gateway monument to let people who are coming over from the coast recognize that they're entering the community of Willits. I understand from what you mentioned earlier that the people who attended that walkabout were leaning more towards the, what did you call it, protected intersections?
Yes.
Would that still allow the opportunity for some kind of a gateway monument?
So we did talk about that. That was something that city staff was really interested in. And we think there could be opportunity maybe in the shoulder areas. It wouldn't be, located in the center like it could be with a roundabout, but there would be opportunities because you'd have expanded shoulder areas for some signage, something like that in those areas.
And Caltrans would be open to that?
Yes, Caltrans has requirements as far as recovery zones and things like that, but I think they are willing to work with the city to come up with something that the city would be interested in that would still fit within their safety requirements.
Great. I think, Willits, one of the things that we've uniquely faced there is that we're a crossroads town of two highways, 101 as our main street for years and Highway 20. And I know that so many of our towns in the county have a similar situation where a highway doubles as the main street. And so making these sorts of changes like this proposal for this intersection really help to take away that sort of highway mentality of drivers coming into our communities and recognizing that they need to be slowing down and looking out. So I really appreciate the efforts of MCOG and Caltrans to acknowledge this situation at this intersection.
So would the plan allow for some refuge? Because one issue is for the children who potentially would be crossing and in fact are probably crossing there. It's such a long distance, and I'm just wondering if there's a way of designing a refuge in the middle.
So rather than the center refuge, the concept would be for curb bulb outs, so it would significantly shorten the crossing distance by extending the sides out, but not a center refuge.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for the update.
And then we'll, as we learn more and as that moves along, I can provide additional information.
Does that put us over to planning staff update?
No, I think we're still on admin staff reports. So I have a report on the SB1 Local Partnership Program guidelines update. The Local Partnership Program is part of SB1. It's something that provides essentially incentive money and matching money for self-help agencies, which are jurisdictions that have transportation sales tax measures. So here in Mendocino County, that includes the cities of Fort Bragg, Willits, and Point Arena. The program in previous funding cycles gives formula money because all of our self-help agencies are very small. They qualify for the funding minimum that was established previously in the LPP guidelines. That funding minimum was $100,000 annually. There's another portion of the program that is distributed competitively. So previously it was 50% competitive and then 50% formula. Unfortunately, we are not able to really compete in the competitive portion of that funding program because the requirements focus a lot on reduction of vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gases. So they're not necessarily a good fit for our local measures, which tend to focus more on preservation of the existing systems. Caltrans and the CTC have recently started the process for updating the guidelines for the next round of funding. So they are looking at both the funding distribution as well as minimally looking at the criteria used in the competitive portion of the program. Earlier this year, there was proposed legislation that would have established a distribution under this program. That was SB 277, and that legislation called for 85% of the funding to be distributed by formula and 15% only available for the competitive program. The MCOG board approved a letter expressing concerns with that piece of legislation. However, it did go through the legislature, was approved by the legislature, but then ultimately it was vetoed by the governor. So in light of that legislation, CTC staff is considering changes to the distribution. So the second page attached to the staff report shows the funding distribution scenarios that were presented at a recent workshop. Option 1 is similar to what was presented or what was done in the previous funding cycle. That's with 50% distributed by formula and 50% competitive. Option 2 would be 60% formula, 40% competitive. Option 3 would be 65% formula, 35% competitive, and then option 4 mirrors the distribution proposed by SB 277. After the first workshop that I attended, it became clear that the urban areas were still pushing for the higher formula distribution with no proposed funding minimum. So I sent a letter to CTC staff expressing the problems that that would create for small self-help agencies, as well as the problems that the criteria for the competitive program pose for our agencies. That's included with the staff report as well. But the good news is that when CTC staff presented the table of scenarios, they were quick to say that options 1 and 4 really are not on the table. So they'll be recommending either option 2 or option 3. Both of those include, actually all 3 out of the 4 options include a doubling of the funding minimum that our self-help cities would benefit from. So I think that will be good news for cities in terms of that funding source. I don't know if we'll see changes to the competitive program that would benefit our agencies, but I think it's highly likely that we will see an increase to that funding minimum. So that would start, the call for projects would be in spring of 2020. So that's something that our local agencies will hopefully be able to look forward to.
I just had a quick question about the basis for formulaic funding. If you look at options 2 and 3 there
Yes.
on the basis, what does that exactly mean, 50-50 versus 100?
So currently the formula is based on population of the self-help agencies. So of course, because it's population-based or rural, we don't have a lot of population, and so if we were to go by straight formula without a funding minimum, our amounts would be very low. You know, it would be, City of Point Arena would receive less than $10,000, something like that. So they're considering changes to how the formula, to the factors that go into the formula. So some combination of population versus revenue. So out of all the agencies that have self-help tax in the state, you know, proportionate to the amount of revenue that each agency brings in out of the total versus population.
So it looks like options 2 and 3 would be beneficial to the cities in Mendocino County that have the sales tax, the dedicated sales tax. Have you heard any indication about whether option A, B, or C, which is 100% population, 50% population revenue? These are for larger agencies that are collecting more than the minimum, I assume.
Yes.
Is there any indication about where the commission is going to go on A, B, or C?
I didn't get a strong sense. There was a lot of, there was no clear winner when people were indicating their preferences for rural agencies. It's going to be a long time before we are not getting just the minimum. So it is less of an issue for us, which factors they use. The urban areas, of course, like population, but there were some that were in favor of revenue as well. I think LA Metro liked the revenue option, but there was no real clear indication what they were leaning towards.
Well, why I'm asking is because if the voters of Mendocino County were to ever approve a half-cent dedicated outside of the cities to the county roads, I'm not sure if the $200,000 formula minimum would be the amount that the county roads would get, or if it was based on population, it would probably generate more money for the county than the revenue source, because so much of the sales tax is collected in the cities, not in the county.
True.
That's pretty hypothetical. It hasn't gone on the ballot yet. Always seems to be another tax measure that goes on the ballot first. But anyway, yeah, this is fantastic. If Fort Bragg, Point Arena, and Willits could all get $200,000 minimum, I think Point Arena collects about $50,000 a year at the half-cent sales tax, so that brings it up to $250,000. You'll have the roads paved with gold over there in Point Arena. And Fort Bragg with $800,000, so now it becomes $1 million a year. And I'm not sure, Willits, what your sales tax generates.
I think it's about 700, 800,000, yeah.
Okay, there you go.
So there is, I believe there's going to be another workshop scheduled in December, but then the California Transportation Commission will have to approve guidelines sometime this spring before the call for projects. So I can report back when we get further along in the process.
Thank you. It was a good letter.
Thank you.
I'll take this one. The reminder Form 700 Statements of Economic Interest. You're used to filing these. What you just approved on consent was a simplified process for MCOG. I did a lot of research this year and figured out we were kind of overworking it and didn't need to do as much as we are. And so what we need you to do is go ahead and continue to file your Form 700 with your county clerk or the city clerk that you usually do. Just make sure you list MCOG on your appointments and committees that you're on. And we don't need a separate form, we don't need an original signature, anything like that. Just go ahead and file that, listing MCOG. And if you'd provide us a courtesy copy, that would be nice. Otherwise, I can get it from the clerks. And we'll just have those on file, but they're not the official place of record. So that makes that a whole lot easier. And that's mainly what I wanted to put out there. I think, you know, in the past, we tried to collect, you know, the same thing that clerks are collecting, and there was all this back and forth, but it's really not necessary. So do what you've been doing and make sure you list MCOG. And if you do provide us a copy, electronic is fine. if you happen to, if it's convenient for you to do so, that would be good. So we've made our duties much more efficient in that regard this year. We had more guidance available from the FPPC. I did some research, got some questions answered, and talked to the county clerk, and I got a lot of new information. So that's working nicely. That's about all I needed to say on that. I guess I should have mentioned that we do have one at-large member who's not elected, Director Carter, and you'd continue to file with the county clerk. They know when the Board of Supervisors appoints someone to MCOG, and that triggers assuming office, and then you get the notice that you have to file Form 700. So everybody here on our board is already taken care of by this clerk. So that's that message. The other thing, I didn't get time to write something for the packet about the North State Super Region, but I thought it was of interest. I wanted to mention it to you. I was able to go up to Crescent City. We had a meeting on November 5th. There were at least 6 of the 16 member counties there in person that traveled to Crescent City. That's pretty good turnout. They do like to meet occasionally in some of the more remote counties in the North State. So we've been to a couple of those now. And then we had people calling in, and we had also present with us a California Transportation Commission staff member, Lori Waters, who runs the Active Transportation Program, and she was there to get input on rural considerations for that very important bike and pedestrian program as they continue to refine the guidelines for that. So she got a lot of input from everybody there. We had a lot of reports from various Caltrans people at headquarters and legislation and things like that. The long-term California Transportation Plan and those kinds of issues we got updates on. The next day was the Transportation Commission's town hall. Periodically they go out to an area of the state that they don't normally get to. They went all the way to Del Norte for this town hall. It was very interesting. There were 2 of the commissioners there, including the chair, and 2 of their staffers, including the executive director, Susan Branson, who you met last February, came here to our meeting. And they all had a transportation tour of the area. And afterwards, a large group of us had lunch together. So it was quite a group. There were all 3 of our elected representatives were actually in attendance there, Congressman Huffman, State Senator McGuire, and Assemblymember Wood. So they were getting a lot of attention that day. A major focus is the Last Chance Grade. I don't know if you've heard of this. This is their big project in Del Norte, where it's about 10 minutes south of the city, of Crescent City on 101. It's undergoing emergency repairs now. Basically, it's on the side of a mountain that drops down to the ocean, and one of the lanes has slipped out. It's 1 lane stop traffic. They're trying to shore that up. It's very complex, and it's going to be an extremely expensive project for them to come up with an alternative. They're in a $50 million environmental phase right now for that. And at the lunch, we were given a demonstration of this holographic technology that the engineers are using, which is very interesting. It's called HoloLens, and you put on goggles like similar to virtual reality, and you see in front of you a holographic image in 3 dimensions. It's sort of like a tabletop, sort of like a, what are those maps called that are 3-dimensional? I'm just, topographical maps. Yeah, it looks like that, but it's a visual image, and it's coming from millions of data points that are in the soil in the area, and so they can pick up what the geology is. Is the earth moving or not? And so they can actually display where the earth's moving, where it's not, and they've been able to lay out some alternative routes for that section of highway, and none of them are going to be easy or inexpensive. It's a gigantic project. So if you ever get a chance to go up there and see what they're doing, it's pretty interesting. But the point being, they have to do something, or that entire county is going to be cut off from the rest of the world almost. You know, the only other way is to go up through Cave Junction and up the Smith River over to Grants Pass and I-5 in Oregon. So they really have to have something done there. So that was well received. There were other presentations from many local agencies at the town hall, really informative. The tribes are very active there. In addition to the transportation projects, what I took away is that Del Norte County is working very hard on economic development, and that the North Coast has issues that are very similar to our own here in Mendocino County.
Okay, thanks. So, do we have any miscellaneous reports?
I don't have anything.
Okay, so we're on to MCOG planning
That's it.
staff.
Hi, I just have one report for you.
Your button.
One report on our annual work program process. So we typically have a 6-week application cycle. We advise the county and the city and MTA. Those are the eligible applicants for planning projects in our annual planning work program. And that starts in mid-October. And those applications are due December 1st, and since that fell on a Sunday, yesterday, agencies have until the end of today to submit their applications. So we just wanted to let you know that we're starting that process, and we spend a few months with the TAC developing the annual work program, and we'll be bringing that to you in the spring.
Okay, thanks. Any miscellaneous reports? Okay, then we'll go to MCOG directors. Do we have any verbal reports we'd like to make? Okay. Well, then with that, we're going to adjourn at 2:38.
Was there a CALCOG? Did you have a CALCOG?
Oh, do you? Okay, sorry.
You should mention that.
Just a little thing. I went to a CALCOG meeting last month, and there were a number of things discussed. Bills that they're working on, mostly housing. Housing is mostly what they're working on right now. But there was an interesting discussion of the CALCOG website, and they would like regions to promote their stories, success stories, disaster stories, whatever. So it's an opportunity on the calcog.org website to see how communities have gathered support to push, beneficial things for the community, how they did not succeed because of whatever. There's some interesting stories on there. And so we're invited to join that. We also had a performance review for the executive director, Bill Higgins, who's done an amazing job of pushing the CALCOG agenda to the governor. And then a discussion of the SAFE, S-A-F-E, Trump administration's rollback of all air quality rules for vehicle emissions, et cetera, and how they're basically trying to delay implementation of SAFE until maybe there's a new administration, and then we'll see if that goes. But there's a lot of even the car vehicle manufacturers are fighting it because they've already gone to whatever California wanted, and so California is fighting and saying we should be able to keep our regulations because we're a state, and the federal government disagrees. Anyway, so there'll be, as Janet said, there'll be a CALCOG meeting of all the of all the CALCOG entities in Riverside.
That's right.
And hopefully you can, do we need to get approval to sign up for that?
No, I would
There's a Black
assume
Friday special if we go early.
they do have a discount going. Yes, we would anticipate that our delegate would go. You've been the delegate this year in February. We make appointments again, so this body might want to reappoint you or have another volunteer. But certainly we'd have a delegate and like them to attend, and we have a travel budget for that. And staff likes to go too. We did notice there was a conflict with our board meeting on that April date, but let's wait and see. We might not need an April board meeting, or somebody might have to miss that meeting, so.
Yeah,
I haven't missed one in 23 years, so I don't want to be that person who misses a meeting.
Just to follow up on the safe vehicle rule, one of the times it's good to be rural is in regards to this rule change. The safe vehicle rule invalidates the tools that are used for air quality conformity determination, which is required in urban areas and rural areas that do not have air quality attainment. So because we are a rural county and are in air quality attainment, we're not subject to the same kind, or projects in our area are not subject to that same review. And so, as far as we know, at this time, projects in Mendocino County won't be affected by that rule. So, large parts of California will be, though.
We're not directly affected. It's a heavy impact on the entire, zero emission vehicle, electric vehicle concept, and all the progress that's been made, and the technology and the infrastructure and planning and, funding that's gone down for many years on that's really would be a setback. So I understand the state is fighting it legally, so we'll see what happens.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
On CALCOG, just a final thing, you talked about the stories they want to have on their website. They already picked up one of our issues. They wrote something about our Covelo multi-purpose trail that's on the CALCOG website, or will be. I think they're revamping their site, but they picked up on that as an interesting thing out of our area. So.
Okay, all right, great.
It is too.
So
yeah.
2:43, we'll adjourn the board meeting.
And we won't see you in January. Have a great holiday. We'll see you in February. No meeting in January.